Be cautious. Be aware. The path of fearlessness. How do those all relate to each other? Be safe. Be risk-free. Create a secure life. The path of fearlessness. How do they all relate to each other? I guess it's sort of like poetry. There's a certain sense of poetry that is about reality in the world, and there's a certain sense that it feels like it's about fiction. When I promote the path of fearlessness, which I always have since 1989, often people will think, what? Are you talking like fantasy, fairy tale, fearlessness, fearless? We need our fears. So many people have said, that keeps me secure, safe, it's natural. We have a great defense. Maybe it's reasonable, maybe it's rational, maybe it's scientific that fear is, quote, natural. All of that under the path of fearlessness as a choice that I made, and I ask and invite others to consider making that choice of the path of fearlessness. In this thing I called the project in search of fearlessness, the fearlessness movement. All these works are part of my research and sincere academic and important study, just because I'm a human being on this path of liberation. So you notice I've now got two parallel concepts, liberation, fearlessness, as paths moving in some kind of purposeful, meaningful direction. Well, now again, there are people and theorists and some research that shows that maybe that is all social fiction, that in fact, I only construct my reality because I'm already fearful. In fact, I need the security of meaning, making, ideas, purpose, because the universe doesn't give a hoot about me and my ego and my body, that I will come and I will go, and that is the mortality game. Homo mortalis, as the terror management theorists will call us, not Homo sapiens so much. The fearful creature, fear of our own death. Path of fearlessness is the practice and living and mindfulness and thoughtfulness, contemplativeness, and exuberance of living as if, but not of fiction necessarily, but living as if in a performative sense that security, the fear of death, is not the great motivator that it's thought to be. Not saying it isn't a big motivator. And the question then becomes, but should it be? And is there some self-fulfilling prophecy in us reclaiming and overstating, over-determining the power and influence of the fear of death? I'm going to give two cases today. I'm going to give the case of time and our relationship to time, my relationship to time personally. I had an experience early this morning before I got up and said, gee, I should do a video on this. And then I'm going to give a second case, which has to do with my wife and I yesterday going out to a winery. First time ever have done so. Probably won't do it again, but it was an experience, and an interesting experience I had there that is related to grizzly bears and humans. Path of fearlessness is just words. True, just symbolic words that are representing something of an idea, but perhaps also not just an idea. Arguably, all ideas, symbolic thinking as well, which humans have this amazing brain to be able to do, are in fact very connected to a deep root in a reality. Now, is our reality that we are fear-based from the start and always will be, and we can more or less transcend that, manage it well, cope with it, and become more or less fearless, courageous, brave, instead of cowering, diminutive, and holding ourselves back from being all that we can? Well, those are larger philosophical questions. That's what a philosopher does first thing in the morning when they get up, and don't need coffee, don't need a hit, don't need something to get me going. I get going because of ideas. And not just ideas because they turn me on, get me excited, get my adrenaline flowing. That it would be easy to become an addict to thinking itself. No, I'm bringing everything back in all that realm of my, yes, brain that loves to think and go into complex ideas, to bring it back to a philosophy of fearlessness and ultimately a psychology of fearlessness for the day. I'm pretty convinced that that's what humanity is ready to grow into. We've been able in parts at times to grow into a psychology of fearlessness. So let me turn to a little evidence and kind of thought experiment, but also a real experiment. See what you think of how observing carefully is one of the first skills for this path of fearlessness work. Sometimes I call it the path of the sacred warrior, in an archetypal sense of how to be a warrior in the world in a sacred way, not a destructive, toxic way. So the path of fearlessness is about observing. So for 6 a.m., I was laying in bed, awake, still dark in the room, and I'm hearing this tick, 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 tick. Familiar? Kept thinking, I don't remember that clock making so much noise. I've often had that experience. I don't know about you, but you might think about there's times when you're tired and you don't notice the tick-tocking of your clock in the room as you go to sleep. Other times it's like you can't go to sleep because the tick-tock, it's so loud, even though the clock is in the same place that it used to be and was the day before when you didn't notice it. So there's something about attention, isn't there? What makes the difference in the volume, the noticing of time being ticked off by a mechanical device designed by somebody else who had an intention, and not just someone. It was a group of people who had the intention to make a mechanical device that would keep us tick-tocked on time. Living in time ticking off linear. This is not a lecture about all the different notions and kinds of times and imaginaries of time that have been in anthropological research for a long time and speculative philosophical thoughts for a long time, where time doesn't have to be always linear, but it certainly has been for a long, long time. And so the simple critique of observation from a fearlessness perspective was, I said, okay, well, that tick-tock of time on this mechanical device, the problem I have with it is not that it's keeping time, and maybe that's helpful and useful to some things in my life, which it is. Like, we have an appointment at the winery at 11 a.m. We better get there. Oh, by the way, you'll know I don't wear a watch. I haven't since probably 13, 14 years old. The reason is I kept losing them. Kept losing time. I think it was an intuitive brilliance, genius, that do not follow time. Get rid of that concept, Michael. Yeah, it probably was. Although as a drummer in a band at 14, I had to keep time, but it was organic time. I never read music, played by ear. And yes, there's a timing to be able to play together with a group of guitars and drums and voices. But I wasn't restricted to, a timing meter that when you study piano or study music, you have to keep time. That was not something I wanted to ever do and still don't. Okay, but back to the TikTok alarm. This morning, the thought was, okay, don't have a problem with time per se, okay, somebody's invented this concept of linear time, 1 second or whatever it is, and then we're going to go to the minutes and then go to hours. Live by that. Supposedly we're supposed to. So I resist that. I resist the thought to begin a critical inquiry this morning. And I come up with the notion of, well, why aren't clocks, TikTok clocks, have a little switch on it that basically says you can have the time recorded, with a digital readout, or it could be, the hands, the time clock hands moving around, or it could be even the sound, tick tock, tick tock. All of those measures and indicators of measurement of a movement, which time apparently is in a certain way. Why don't we have a little button or, knob that we can turn and go customize? I don't want to know every second of time. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want it to be in my life. So I'm going to turn the dial or push the buttons, digital, and I'm going to make and design a clock that basically says, well, I only want to hear and see the digital readout, or hear the tick, or watch the hand move every 10 seconds, not every 1 second. Oh, no. I actually want to push that to every 30 seconds. A minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, every half hour, every hour. Tune me in then. Clock. Follow me. Follow my desire to live and be aware in a relationship with time, which is not a bad thing per se. But you see, here's where the pathology comes, the obsession with security that I started this video with. It is going to be designed by somebody to make sure you see it every second. I mean, all the clocks I've ever seen or heard of, that's how they're designed. Maybe there's some that I don't know of that are designed differently, but that's what they are. So it's that mechanical repetition of a pre-given destiny of time unfolding, and that you're going to be reminded of it every second. Even if you don't hear it or notice it unconsciously, that data is still going in, being recorded. Won't go into the long argument of it. I'm not sure I've even worked out what the argument would be, but it's like, that's a really good way to terrorize people, by that mechanical, designed, forced totalitarian regime of time implantation. Just imagine if they did that as a little digital implant when you're born and they put it in the bottom of your foot or behind your ear in a microchip. Then they can really terrorize you and run you on the counting of time that your time is running out. Why else would we design it that way if we didn't want to control people? So we become our own enemy, right? This Homo sapiens, Homo mortalis, species that fears death so greatly. And indeed, some truth, some partial half-baked truths to that. I don't think it's a well worked out philosophy of time, that kind of emphasis on the extremis, death itself. Okay, let's go to the next case. Path of Fearlessness, case 2. My wife and I get in the car an hour and a half early to drive to this winery, which is out in this beautiful countryside in Alberta. And that's the only reason we're really going. Yes, we bought a few bottles of wine and did a wine tasting, and it was an interesting tour in a flower making based industry that they small farmers have created. Beautiful little setup. And the mountainside, pretty much in the foothills, just next to the mountains anyway. Well, we loved the trip, and we were also planning to go and have a picnic and along another river that I wanted to go to, a place I went since I was a kid. But we get to the beautiful place. I noticed on their website, they say, stay in your car. You know, I guess this is the COVID treatment for the wine tours, right? The COVID regime of security. Stay in your cars. They didn't say wear masks, even though Barbara and I did take masks and wore them for the first few minutes. We didn't stay in our cars because we thought that was silly. But we stayed near the car. I was scanning with my binoculars the beautiful landscape. Quite wild, semi-wild, right? Kind of ranch country. Watching hawks, watching deer, watching things on the slope that could be interesting, like even bears, which I know bears are out there. Anyways, find out that there's a sign that says Cathedral Path right next to the actual winery where you go for the tour. And the Cathedral Path led, just briefly we could see, into quite a beautiful old growth forest of probably Douglas firs, white spruce, various poplar trees, and just a really lovely hillside, north slope. And, you know, wow, love to walk that path. Well, found out you can't just go walk the path. There's a sign at the beginning that has rules, and they were listed many rules about using this path. One of them is you have to buy at least 12 bottles of wine from the winery, and then you can sign up and get your ambassador membership. Okay, besides all that, I was much more intrigued with the little paragraph at the bottom of the sign. This is nailed on a wood post, right? At the trailhead. Wasn't the exact trailhead, because it said, when you get to the trailhead on this path, Cathedral Grove, magical, mystical forest, was what way they kind of presented the imagery for taking this 1 hour loop on their property in this beautiful forest. The paragraph said that at the front end of the trailhead, there'll be a box, and you can pick up a radio, and you can pick up your bear spray. It's all there. Okay, interesting. I thought, okay, this is now becoming quite the thing, is you carry a radio with you when you're walking the path, and bear spray. And I'm presuming that you pretty much have to do this. Didn't say that exactly on the sign, but just kind of imagine, right? You're coming from the city, or as a citizen, and you want to go out into nature in this beautiful forest, and it's a bit semi-wilderness, but not total wilderness at all. And you're going to have to be armed with a radio, which is to radio contact them if any emergency. And that's what it said, use only in emergency. Bear spray, same, use only in emergency. The bear must be at least 12 feet away from you, which I always find that interesting, a bear charging at you. How you're going to estimate that 12 feet and wait long enough to then push the button, 12 feet. Okay, yeah. Anyway, sounds interesting theoretically. So what occurred to me in the driving home and thinking a bit about the path of fearlessness is that what that whole setup in this lovely location did was create this securing, ensuring no injury, no lawsuits to the people on the land who let you go walk their cathedral path. And all of a sudden, I start to really see how fear conditioned, like the TikTok time, that even to walk is now being monitored in a forest in the semi-wilderness. And they're going to make sure they provide you with the instruments of protection. Bear spray, radio. Who wants to carry that stuff? Not me. Yeah, I want to go walk the path, you bet. Oh, but there's risk. Yeah, that's part of why I want to walk the path. Fearlessness is about acknowledging the fundamental reality of risk, which is like the existentialists and the terror management theory people, is that life is limited by conditions and vulnerabilities that could bring about your death and demise, or at least injury on the way to death and demise. But not here. And so here we were, 2020, out in the semi-wilderness, hour drive from my city, the big city, Calgary, and all here, they're going to monitor you and have you carry weapons in case. And then I find out it says they have cameras all over and along this trail to ensure, at least this is the narrative one is supposed to believe, to ensure that no wild animals, bears particularly, that's the big concern, or wolves, there's also wolves in this area, are going to, hassle people, threaten their life. And then I thought, well, maybe the cameras are also there for monitoring the human beings and what they're doing when they go off on their wilderness cathedral walk. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And I don't mean white-tailed deer or mule deer. I mean the sad truth of how afraid we have become of life. And even in the pursuit of this beautiful venture of these European immigrants coming to settle here in this country and buy a homestead at the edge of the wilderness and produce, apparently the best honey and some of the best wine that comes from that flower honey, all natural, more or less. The managing of the bees is perhaps not so natural, but it's a natural process the bees are involved in making honey. And the whole thing, of grizzly bears and black bears and other animals that have lived there forever, are now the enemy, and we are going to secure ourselves at every moment. And again, it's the cameras are also part of securing the property, so nobody does anything unpleasant. Even the ambassadors, members of the winery, who are supposed to be your best customers, why would they do anything damaging? Well, of course, none of this is said and they're not talked about, and it's, these are all there for your security, is the narrative. And I could walk into a high school or junior high or a elementary school today, and pretty much the same thing. I'd see cameras and I'd see all kinds of security systems, or this kind or that kind, and possibly security guards or a metal detector at the front doors, whatever the case will be of the kinds of security systems. And it's all there, arguably for your best interest, the best interest of your child, and so on. But what does that do to the path of fearlessness? And if you don't like fearlessness, the path of freedom. And if you don't like freedom, come up with your own word for what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. I know what humans, all creatures, the wild creatures, want to do. They want to be free. Oh, they also want to live. Yeah, we all want to live. We're living beings. We want to live. But what's the trade-off, right? So the path of fearlessness is about observation of when someone else, some system, some totalitarian regime of some kind, and that can be very subtle. It's not overt politics of a political totalitarian regime of the worst kinds, dictatorships, but I'm just talking about everyday living, what Robert J. Lifton called totalism, as an ideology that begins to take over and control the design of every movement, every thought, more or less. And I'm not being paranoid about this. It's just these are observations of real controls of putting safety and security first over risk of real life experience, of living, of natural. So what would have been nice on the sign, just like, I wanted to customize the tick clock. I wanted to customize at the bottom of their sign, I would write in, and these are what we suggest. And basically, if you choose not to follow any of those, walk this path at your own risk. Which also means the owners of that cathedral trail, which they made for the benefit of the enjoyment and the beauty and the natural and the quality of life for their customers, mostly from the city going to the country, that all they say is walk it at your own risk. And you do see that on way out in the wilderness, where governments in parks will often put up that kind of sign, walk at your own risk. Yeah, we suggest that you carry bear bells or bear spray, or make sure you have some security system of phoning other people or whatever. Well, I don't carry a phone, and I don't carry knives, and I don't carry bear spray, and I don't carry bells. If I'm going to go walk the path, it's kind of interesting, right? The path on the cathedral trail or any trail anywhere. I'm going to do that with all the awareness of some of the dangers. I won't know them all, but I'm going to be aware that at least I'm aware of some dangers, and I'm unaware of other dangers. And that, the whole trip doesn't have to be about me thinking about dangers. Well, that is really challenging to not get into. And I can easily get into that, and I can watch my little mind and my conditioning within the totality and fear matrix state that's been conditioned into me is to be fearful and seeking safety and security at every possibility so that I don't die. So at the bottom of the sign, I would even include not only walk at your own risk, walk and enjoy this path celebrate life, and be prepared to die. That could be at the hands of a grizzly bear. And if you have an allergic reaction to a bee sting, like a wasp, you could die out there anyway in a few seconds. Okay, thanks for listening. The Path of Fearlessness is one based on observation, was my point. And that's an observation, not a paranoia, but a clear understanding of risks and vulnerabilities in life and the limitations of death and mortality, which is our absolute end and inevitable end. I'm Michael Fisher here today, fearologist, fear analyst, looking at the TikTok clock and the path of fearlessness.